Today we're making the Maya top. Hi everyone, my name's Jamie. Welcome back to another sewing tutorial. Today we're making one of my favorite tops, which is the Maya top. I came out with the Maya top, I think it was middle of last year, 2023. I think, and it has been one of my most popular tops. It is super gorgeous, super comfortable, and it has that adjustability in the bust strap here, which I think is really great for those who maybe they don't fit the exact measurements that are on my website, so you need that little bit of extra room in the bust, and this top really allows you to adjust like that. If you've made the April top, or maybe you own the April top, it's the same sort of adjustability. It's just that front part has that strap on it, and you can move that around and change the ruffles, and that just allows you to adjust this sort of front neckline here, give you more or less room. It's super great, and I love wearing it, especially like springtime. I think it's the perfect top for spring, and it's got elastic in the middle waistline here, as you can see, and that makes it just super snug to your body, and also gives that little like sort of roughly sort of detail there as well, and also makes it suitable to those who again don't fit the exact measurements, because sometimes when you get tops that are, you know, tight fitted and everything, they're a bit uncomfortable to wear. So with that elastic, it allows it to mold to your body. So last year around this time, actually I uploaded a video to TikTok that is now probably one of my most popular videos. It's got 450,000 views, which is way above average for me, but I uploaded a video showing how I make the Maya top, why I made it, and just like a little info video on it, and it blew up, and I had so many people on that video commenting saying if I'll ever sell the sewing pattern for it. And this was before I was even selling sewing patterns, but it was kind of the reason that made me think like maybe I should, because I had so many people wanting to make this piece. So that's why I decided that, okay, I'm going to sell the sewing pattern for this, because it is such a gorgeous top and it's not as daunting to make as it looks like, and I think that you guys would really love being able to make your own Maya top. The material that I use to make this in is called cotton double gauze. You can get it from Potter & Co. if you're in Australia. I'm not sure of other places that sell it, but I'm pretty sure that Spotlight have it, and maybe some other shops, fabric shops you can get it from. But the material and the one that I use is from Potter & Co. and it's called organic cotton double gauze, and it's just this really gorgeous loose weave cotton material. It's similar to muslin, but it's a bit thicker than muslin if you've ever worked with muslin, and it's also a lot softer. Like, I remember when I did the markets, every time someone would come up and feel this fabric, they would be like, oh my gosh, it's so soft, and it really is. It's just so gorgeous. If you're a beginner, you can definitely give this top a go. It's not as daunting as it looks like. The only hard part is kind of this back neckline sort of part where the elastic and the drawstring sort of are, which I'll talk you through that in the tutorial. But otherwise it is really easy to make, as long as you're making it in this fabric. If you're wanting to make it in any other fabric that isn't cotton double gauze, you'll have to make bias tape for it, or bias binding tape for it, just because you need to have sort of that malleability in the shoulders and the arms and everything, and through the waistline. So I'll show you how to make that in the tutorial if you're doing linen or any other fabric. If you're using cotton double gauze like I do, then you don't have to make bias tape. I've never made bias tape when making these tops, just because cotton double gauze doesn't really hold the shape very well, like the bias shape very well. So you can iron it, but it'll kind of just fold back to its regular flat shape. So I've never really made bias tape for it. I do for another top that I make, and it's just really fiddly to do. So I just do it by making a casing, which you can just do by cutting the strips of fabric along the grain line. You will also have to iron parts of that, but I'll show you that in the tutorial as well, and tell you which ones you need to iron just to help you with sewing them. But yeah, you don't need to do bias tape if you're using this fabric, just because it's got that little bit of give to it, and also it's kind of just like that poofy sort of look as well that you're after anyway. So let's get started with the tutorial. Once you've printed out your sewing patterns and assembled them, you're going to cut out your sizing. I recommend sticking to your regular size, or you can size up if you have a larger bust. If you have a smaller bust, you can size down. And I also like to make sure that when I'm cutting out my patterns, I'm leaving about 1/2 centimeter to 1 centimeter of allowance in the paper. If you're using cotton double gauze like I am, you can place down your strap pieces along the grain and cut your patterns out that way. If you're using anything else like linen or cotton or just any other fabric that isn't cotton double gauze, you'll have to make a bias tape for the elastic pieces to go through. Cut the rest of your patterns out. If you're also doing it in a light colored fabric, I recommend cutting an extra set of the front panel pieces out, but if you're doing it in a dark colored fabric that isn't really see-through, then you can just cut out 2 pieces of the front panel. If you're making bias binding, you can do the square method, which is what I do, and you basically just make a square that is 18 by 18 inches or 16 by 16, 17 by 17, something like that. And this just makes you a bulk amount of bias tape. Basically make the square and then you cut it on a diagonal in half, and then you flip the pieces over so that one side is touching the other side. Then just pin that in place and do a straight stitch along the edge, and then with the wrong side facing you, with this funny looking rectangle sort of shape, you're going to take either fabric chalk, or you can get water erasable pens, air erasable pens, and just measure out along the longest side of this shape a 1.5 inch measurement, and then just draw a line going all the way across. And then once you've got the bottom line, go up from that line, do another one, and basically just continue going all the way along until you basically just have a set of lines all across this shape. And then after that, you're going to fold it over, basically with the edges aligning with the other edges that you just sewed, and then you're going to offset it slightly so that the lines on either side align with each other, if that makes sense. And then this will just allow you to cut out a continuous circle. Pin all those sides in place and then just sew a straight stitch across this section that you've pinned, and then after that you can begin cutting out your strip of bias tape. Cut this out by going along those lines. You can't really see the lines on mine and it's very faint, but basically you just cut along those lines that you drew, and then once you're finished cutting out, you have this big long strip of bias tape that you can now iron and fold into place. So now that you've got the strip of bias tape, cut off any excess fabric or bulk fabric, because you want this to sit nice and flat when you're sewing it. So cut off any extra bits that are at the seams and any chunky bits that are on the side that maybe cut a bit funny like I have. And then all you have to do is fold the halves in halves, or basically fold into quarters, I guess. So I fold one side into the center and then iron it, and then fold the other side into the center. And then typically when you make bias tape, you'll do this and then also fold it in half again. But for this top, we're not going to do the other half because we won't be using it as bias tape specifically, or like as a piece that you'll put on the edge of something. We'll be using it on the inside of our garment. So as long as you have these two sides folded in, you don't really need to bother about doing the other part. But if you're using the bias tape for something else, then also fold it over like this and then iron it down. Moving on to the actual Maya top, you're going to take your front two pieces. If you're using a light colored fabric like I am, I recommend lining it by cutting out the extra
front panel pieces and then sewing them to each other by just doing a basing stitch or sewing around the edges. I don't remove this because I end up sewing over it anyway, so you can leave this in. Just make sure that you cover it when you're sewing later on. But yeah, you don't have to line this if you don't want to. I just do this for the lighter colored fabric, so then you don't have to wear a bra or anything underneath it. If you're using a dark colored fabric, then you can just leave it. Once you've done that, make sure everything's nice and secure and that the pieces are sitting nice and flat. And then now we're going to overlock the opening edge of the top, which is the side that doesn't have the notch in it. And if you don't have an overlocker, you can just do a zigzag stitch across this edge. Place your two front pieces good sides facing each other, and then basically, if you can't see the notch that's here at the front, you can just measure it out, which is what I did because I don't think I put a notch in it, but just measure out about 5 to 6 centimeters on the front here, because you're going to stitch this together with a straight stitch and leaving about a 1 centimeter gap from the edge. And then this is going to create your opening and hold those front panels together. And then you can also iron down those sides there so that you can hem, but I just went straight ahead and started hemming them. Your hem will be about 1 centimeter on those front pieces there, and I just do this by folding over those edges back onto themselves and then doing a straight stitch. But if you don't want to just do it the quick way that I did, you can also iron them flat and pin them in place. But basically, once you're done, they will look like this on the inside, and then they'll also be really beautiful and crisp on the outside as well. We're going to do the shoulder straps now. So place your front panel down on the table facing you, and then take your shoulder straps and place them at the top and pin them in place. Then I just fold over the bottom bit onto itself, or like the shoulder strap onto itself, and then taking the back panel, I also pin the top of the shoulder to the shoulder straps in place. And then you're going to sew a straight stitch across here, and then you'll also overlock or do a zigzag stitch after. We'll also pin the sides of the top together so that we can create the top part of this piece, and just do the right sides facing each other and then pin them in place. Do a straight stitch about 1 centimeter from the side, and then after we'll also overlock everything. Make sure you overlock all of the sides that you've just sewn the straight stitches on. You don't want to forget doing the shoulder straps as well. If you don't have an overlocker, you can just do a zigzag stitch as well. Now we're going to move on to the bottom panel. If you've cut the full panel out like I have, then this will be very easy. But if you haven't and you've cut 2 pieces out because maybe your fabric isn't long enough, then make sure you've just sewn one side together and then do a zigzag stitch or overlock it. And then when you're placing your casing, put it on the inside, not on the good side of the fabric, because you want to hide all of this casing on the inside. So you'll pin the casing to the bottom panel on the longest length or the longest side. If you're using bias tape, just make sure that the top of the bias tape is flat like in the video here, because you're going to want to fold the bottom edge underneath itself, but the top part you're going to want to have it left like this so that you can attach the top panel of the top to the bottom panel of the top and then just combine all of those pieces together so it'll sit flat. But how I've done it is I just leave that piece flat and then I fold it over and iron it after so that I can then fold it underneath itself and sew a straight stitch over the top. So as you see here, the top of the bottom panel and the top of the casing is nice and flat here. So then when we're sewing the bottom to the top of the top, it all kind of sits nice and flat together. That's why I leave that flat. And if you're doing bias tape, you should leave one side flat, at least for this top one, and then the bottom side have it folded over. Then the side that has the folded edge, you're basically going to press that against the bottom panel so that it's folded under itself, and that'll hide all of those raw edges. You're going to pin them in place along that whole side and then sew a straight stitch along that edge, and this will create the casing where the elastic will go through. Then for this next bit, you're going to need to measure out where you're going to be putting the next casing. So I use this little thing here. I don't really know what it's called, but I use this. You can use a ruler or just some measuring tape and a water erasable pen or an air erasable pen. And you're going to measure out 2.5 inches down from where you've sewn that bottom line or where the bottom of the top casing is. And you're going to just draw a little dot, or you can draw a full line along there if you like to, but I just do a little dot so that it's not too much to try and remove later on. The air erasable pen takes like a few hours to disappear if you've done like a big dot or anything on the fabric, so just be aware of that. As you can see, there's a little dot there so that we know where to put the casing. Now, if you're using cotton double gauze like I am, this is where you can iron down your casing pieces. I only iron the casing for the bottom and the middle of the bottom panel, as well as like that bottom side of the top part that we just did before. And then I also iron down the casing for the armholes and the neckline. So you do this just by how we did the bias tape earlier on. If you watched that, you just fold those 2 sides in, and you don't need to fold it in half again. You just need to fold the 2 sides in to each other, and then that's it. That's your casing. So the middle part and the bottom part for the casing on the bottom panel is a little bit different from the top. You want to have the bottom fold pinned to or like in line with where the dots are that you've just drawn down, or that line that you've just drawn down that's 2.5 inches down from the top casing that you've sewn in. So pin this all in place, and then you're going to do a straight stitch, and it's really good if you've ironed this down because then you can kind of follow along where you've ironed. There'll be like a little crease there. Then once you're done sewing, you'll fold that top edge that you folded over before back onto itself like I have shown in this video, and then it'll sit nice and flat against that bottom panel, and this will then create your casing, and it'll be different from the top one. As you can see, it'll be its own casing itself and not have that raw edge on the top like the top part does. The top part is completely different. You need to have it like that because otherwise it'll just get all bunched up and sit funny. Once you've sewn along that bottom part of that new casing, we're going to do the exact same step for the next part. Measure out 2.5 inches down from the bottom of the last casing that you just did. Pin the bottom part of that fold of the casing to the bottom panel, and then just go all the way along and sew another straight stitch, and then you'll fold it back over onto itself and sew another straight stitch, and then you have your casing again, and this is where you'll put your elastic in. We're going to do the casing for the top part of the top now, which is basically the exact same as what we did just before, except on the very front edge of the casing, you're going to want to hem that so that it'll sit nice and flat. And I also overlock it so that there's no raw edges hanging out, because you're also going to be pulling a strap through this, so you don't want any threads coming loose or anything. So yeah, pin the good side of the casing to the good side of the top panel / shoulder / back, and that sort of line that's there when you are ironing, if you can still see that, that's kind of your seam allowance. So you can just kind of sew along that edge there and hold everything in place. And then after this, we'll also go along and overlock the edge, or you can do a zigzag stitch to hold everything in place. It'll just also help with making sure that there's no raw edges or threads coming loose, because you are going to have a strap going through there that will allow you to adjust the top. And if you're having the strap being pulled along there constantly, you don't want to be having any threads coming loose from this part. I overlock that inside edge that we've just sewn, and then I also overlock the other side of the casing, because again, we're going to be having that strap going through there. So just to be extra careful to make sure that it hasn't got any loose threads coming from it, we also overlock the other side of the casing. If you've overlocked those edges, take a large needle and then go through the loops of the overlocking thread and take the tail end of the thread and put it through the needle and then pull the needle through those loops. This will help hold that whole thread in place so that it won't come undone later on, and it'll also stop it from just unraveling and just make it look a lot nicer and sit a lot better as well. The seam that holds the casing and the front panel together, we're going to kind of do a little stitch there to hold that in place so that it stops flicking up or causing the threads to come loose when you're moving the straps together. So you basically push that flat against the inside of the front panel, and then you're just going to sew about a 2 to 3 centimeter straight stitch across that part there, and then that'll just hold any loose threads as well as stop that part flicking up. Hopefully that makes sense. And as you can see, this is what I'm talking about. This is like the top of the front panel, and then that's the inside of it. Now we're going to do the casing for the top neckline, and as you can see, I kind of fold the casing into itself into like a little triangle shape just to help hold the threads in place, and then I just pin that in place because we're going to be sewing along this edge again, and then go along the whole edge, pin it in place, and then when we get to the back panel and the shoulder strap where the seam is there, I pin a pin just going a different direction so that I remember to stop before I get there, because we're going to want to leave a little gap because we'll put the elastic and the shoulder straps through here, so you want to have a little gap left there. Now that that's all pinned in place, we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to sew a straight stitch all along this edge where we've pinned. Remember that when we get to the back seam with the shoulder strap and the back panel, we're going to leave a few centimeters of a gap over that seam so that we can add the elastic and the shoulder strap through it. Make sure you stop, do a back tack there, and then leave a little bit of a gap, and then continue on the back panel and sew a straight stitch along the edge. Once you get to the other side, do the same thing, leave a couple centimeters gap. Make sure that you back tack as well, because you don't want this thread coming unloose while you're adding the other pieces or while you're continuing to sew later on. When that's done, this is what it'll look like from the good side, and then from the inside it'll still look really nice and clean and everything. There won't be any threads anywhere, and then you'll also have that little gap over the seam of the shoulder strap and back panel so that you can add your elastic and strap. We'll do the armhole casing now. So you're going to take your bias tape or just your casing and fold over that top edge. You can hem it if you'd like, but I just fold it over. It does the same thing. And then just pin all the way around. Remember, the good side of the top facing the good side of the casing. Once it's all pinned in place, I remove this arm sort of part of my sewing machine. Most sewing machines should be able to do that. And then I kind of slip the armhole through that part and then sew all along that edge there. This just makes sure that I'm not catching the other side of the arm or sleeve hole while I'm sewing. The next step is kind of a little bit tricky. Make sure that your piece is sitting flat and you want the wrong side facing you, or the inside of the top facing you. And you're going to take the folded edge of the casing and then kind of fold it onto itself and then inside the top. You want to make sure that the bias tape or the casing is sitting inside. You don't want it kind of sitting on the edge. When you normally do bias tape, it should be like sitting over that edge bit there. So make sure that it's folded onto the inside, and then this will create the casing where you can put your elastic through. Sew along this edge where you've just pinned. Make sure that when you get to the end, you leave a gap so that you can thread your elastic through as well. This is what it should look like, and you should have that little gap there so that you can thread your elastic through. Now we're going to take our elastic and we're going to start with the back panel first, and you're going to thread that shorter piece of elastic through the back panel part, and then where the seam is on the shoulder and the back panel, you're going to align the elastic with that seam, and then you're going to sew a straight stitch over this. Just go back and forth a couple of times to hold it in place. Make sure that you don't sew over the casing because you won't be able to fold it back over and the elastic will just flip. So make sure that you're only sewing the elastic to the seam, and it should look like this. If you've done it really good, it will go in that little like ditch there of the seam. Make sure your elastic is sitting flat and then pull it through the other side and sew a straight stitch there, just like what we did before. Then we're going to do the same thing for the bust straps. We're going to thread that through the neckline casing, go all the way through down to where that back and shoulder seam is. And instead of sewing the bust strap to where the elastic is on that seam, we're going to actually sew it to the inside of the casing. So make sure that you have enough space to be able to sew the strap there, as well as also pull the fabric back so that it sits nice and flat. You don't want the elastic to bunch it all up or anything. And then if you need to, you can pin the strap there, but I just place it there and then sew a diagonal stitch across there. And this will just help with when you're adjusting the top to adjust it and make sure all the ruffles sit nicely. If you sew it to where the elastic is, it just kind of sits funny. So that's why I sew it to the inside of the casing. This is what it'll look like with the stitches. You'll have one stitch on that seam on the actual top, and then one stitch on the inside where the casing is. And then you should be able to fold this over and everything should sit nice and flat. This is probably the only hardest part of the top. The rest is pretty easy. Do the exact same for the other side, and then we're going to close up that hole by sewing a straight stitch across that edge there. I just pin that in place, and then if you've got the elastic there and you find that it's bunching up, you can just pull the elastic and the fabric slightly so that it'll sit flat when it's going under the sewing machine. Once you're done, this is what it should look like. The elastic should be able to ruffle up at the back there nice and freely, and then the inside should sit nice and flat like this. And then also when you're adjusting the top, the bust strap is freely in the casing, so you can just move the ruffles around as you like and adjust it to your liking. Now we'll add the elastic into the armholes, and you just do this by threading the elastic all the way through there. Make sure that it sits nice and flat, and then once it comes out the other side, align the elastics together, and then you're going to sew a straight stitch over those two edges. Again, make sure that your elastic is flat all the way around. You don't want to have the elastic twisted underneath because it'll be very annoying when you're wearing it. So make sure it sits nice and flat. Sew a zigzag stitch a couple of centimeters up and down that elastic part where it's overlapping, and this will just allow it to stretch when you're wearing it, because if you do a straight stitch across there, the stitch will break, so that's why you have to do a zigzag stitch across there. Thread the elastic through both armholes, and then you're going to close up the hole where you've threaded that through by doing a straight stitch across that edge there. Make sure that you're pulling the fabric a little bit so that it'll sit flat, because if it's all bunched up, it'll kind of gather and sit funny. And then this is what the armhole will look like. Now we'll do the exact same thing for the bottom panel. You'll just thread your elastic all the way through the casing. You'll have to do each at a time. Once you get like kind of halfway through, you might need to sew one end of the elastic down so that you don't lose it. So I get about halfway through, and then I just pull the end of the elastic through until it gets to the edge of the casing, and I stick out about a 0.5 centimeter to 1 centimeter of the elastic, and then sew over that edge where the casing and the bottom panel kind of opening is, and then that'll just hold it in place. And then you can pull the other end of the elastic all the way through to the other side, sew a straight stitch, and then just repeat this for the other two casings. Once that's done, you'll have this. I just like to pull it and make sure all the ruffles are sitting nicely, and then I push some of the bits back so that when I'm sewing over this edge, I'm not going over a lot of fabric and I'm not catching any ruffled edges. Take the two side seams of the bottom panel and have them good sides facing each other and pin them in place, and then we're going to sew a straight stitch along this edge here to hold them in place, and then you can cut off any excess fabric once you've sewn it, and then you're going to go to your overlocker and overlock this edge, or you can also do a zigzag stitch along this edge if you don't have an overlocker. Once you've overlocked the side seam, you can then also overlock the bottom edge where the hem will be. If you don't have an overlocker, just zigzag stitch, or you can also do a rolled hem if you'd like. Then you're going to fold the hem over onto itself and then sew the hem, which is about 0.5 centimeter to 1 centimeter, depending on what you prefer. You can either iron this down as well and pin it in place, but I just do this freely because I've been doing it for a long time. So just fold that over and sew a straight stitch in place. Again, if you don't want to do an overlocker, if you don't want to do a zigzag stitch or overlock this edge, you can just do a rolled hem as well, because that will hide all of those threads there. Once that's done, you're going to find the side seam on the bottom panel and the top panel, and with the good sides facing, you're going to pin the side seams together. I like to have the bottom panel on with the good side facing out, and then the top with the good side on the inside touching the bottom panel. Pin the side seams together, and then you're going to go around the whole edge and pin in place. I like to stretch the front part and of the bottom panel so that it'll sit nice and flat. You can also leave it if you want it to be more bunched up there, but I prefer to have the front nice and flat. And then when you go to the back, there'll be some more bunching of the fabric there. This will just add more of that like gathered sort of look to the top. If you'd like, you can have a little bit more of the gather happening at the front, but I just like to do it this way. So this is what it'll look like on the back. It'll have a little bit more of a gather to it, and then the front will sit nice and flat when you pull the elastic. So again, if you want to, you can have more of the gathers happening at the front if you like that, but I just prefer to have most of it sitting at the back, because then the front, when you're wearing it, will bunch up where that elastic is and create more of a, I guess, cup shape for the top. So a straight stitch all along this edge. You want to make sure that you're pulling the elastic as you go, because if you don't, then you won't be able to get into this top. It'll be too tight. So make sure that you're pulling the elastic as you sew and the fabric is nice and flat, or as flat as you can when you're sewing. Then once it's done, it will look like this. Also make sure that you haven't missed any of those edges there and you don't have any gathers sticking out or threads sticking out. If you do, unpick that part and then re-sew over it. And then after that, go to your overlocker and overlock all along there, or you can do a zigzag stitch as well. Once that's done, with that little tail end of the overlocker, we're going to do what we did earlier on and thread that little tail end of the overlocking thread through the loops and then cut off any excess, and this will just help to hold that in place and look nice and neat. Then the last thing that you have to do is just tie a knot in the end of your bust strap there, and make sure that you cut nice and close to the knot so that there's not any threads or frayed edges coming out. And then you're done. All you have to do to adjust this top as well is just move the fabric along the strap, and it's very easy to do. And then you can just tie a little knot in the front and that's it, you're done.
And that is the end of the tutorial. I can't wait to see your Maya tops. I'm super excited for you guys to create your very own. There are so many different colors of this gorgeous cotton double gauze online that I've seen, so it'd be super fun to see what other colors you guys create these in. I currently just create them in black and white on my website, but there's so many different colors online that you can buy, so I think this would be really nice in like a sage green, like a deep sort of olivey green color, or maybe even like a brown. That would be really, really beautiful. But yeah, super, super gorgeous. Also, another tip, if you don't want to have all of these little elastic tiers, you can take them out. You can remove like the bottom two and just have this bottom one that goes under the bust there. You'll need to at least have that one so that it kind of holds the shape and everything. But I've done custom orders where I've removed these two bottom tiers as well, because some people might not like that on them. If you find that there is a little bit too much fabric, like if it's too flowy or anything, you can just kind of cut in the sides a little bit or just remove some fabric from the sides. But otherwise, yeah, it's super easy to make, super fun, and I'm really excited to see you guys create your very own. Be sure to tag me at inmay_the_label on Instagram or TikTok if you've made the Maya top or any other of my sewing patterns. And also, I'm hoping for my next sewing tutorial sort of video that I'll do a how to sew sort of video or a tips and tricks type video for sewing. So if you have any questions, please feel free to comment them down below or message me on Instagram, and then I can reply that in a video, because I have a lot of people who are asking me about sewing and how to sew and all those types of things. So I think that if I just make one big video teaching you guys the basics of sewing, then it'll be really helpful for you guys. So yeah, anyway, that's it, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.